Recovery Reform is a podcast that provides educational content while addressing the stigma against drugs and the people who use them. Expertise meets lived experience as the hosts and their respective guests unpack the multifaceted cause that is recovery reform.
Welcome back to the Recovery Reform Podcast. I'm Taylor Nichols. I am here as always with my co-host, Macaulay Sexton, and I am really excited for our guest today. We're joined by Chad Sabora, who is a former lawyer with lived experience of drug use and a longtime grassroots harm reduction advocate turned subject matter expert. He started his journey under the mentorship of some of the harm reduction movement founders, helping to create naloxone distribution networks before that was even legally sanctioned across the country. He also helped start some of the first syringe access programs in cities like St. Louis and in South Florida, and was an innovator of the hybrid harm reduction community center model, which integrates harm reduction and traditional recovery services. Chad has been at the forefront of advancing progressive drug policy and most recently served on the committee that authored the groundbreaking harm reduction framework for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, which, for those of you who don't know, issues the nationwide guidance for treatment, including now harm reduction, which is finally included in SAMHSA's treatment framework. Today, he's joining us to share his journey and perspective on the current state of harm reduction and sort of how he got to where he is today. So where did your interest in this and your sort of expertise develop over time?
There's no timeline that is like a cohesive explanation because there's so many factors that came into play. My father was in recovery, found his own personal recovery long before he met my mom, but he was a drug and alcohol counselor and then an executive at a treatment center. My mother was a prosecutor. So I was raised in an environment where intellectual discourse and debates were a common dinner occurrence about this topic. So from an early age, I was exposed to this idea. My dad was also a very altruistic individual, and I had so many uncles who I didn't realize were inpatient at the centers, and he would grab the van from the treatment center and pick them all up and bring them back to the house if we were doing work in the house. And these were my uncles, and they were in treatment. And everybody that I grew up with that were my dad's friends were all in recovery, and I had no idea. But it was ingrained in me at a very young age. Then I went on to get my degrees, and I'd always been a little reckless. So after my law school, both my parents passed away from cancer within about 18 months, and I spiraled out for about 6 years on a mission of self-destruction, which I was not successful at because I'm still here. And then when I found recovery in 2011, I got my head out of my ass when it comes to, just everything. And I'm very neurodivergent, so I'll hyper-focus on things for months at a time. So this is something I've hyper-focused on since 2011. I dove into it because my friends were dying. I started my recovery journey in your traditional, fashion with recovery supportive programs, I'll call them. And they were very beneficial to me for a while, but then they became toxic. But I still cared about the people that I had met. And very, very early on, and this is way before there was any federal funding for naloxone. Most people didn't know about it, except in areas where there was already established distribution, Chicago, Massachusetts. A lot of this is 2013. And I was watching my friends die over and over again. I was watching bodies get dumped. So first thing I did was I got a mentor. Her name was Kathy Kane Willis, who's no longer in this field, but she helped me launch my political advocacy work and helped me file my first bill with a rep in Missouri, which was our overdose immunity law. And then that wasn't enough for me, so I drove to Chicago, met up with Dan Bigg, who actually was friends with my dad, to acquaintances, and went to Chicago Recovery Alliance, met the warehouse they had when Dan was there, and sat down and spent a few hours with him, like learning, and then loaded up my car with as much naloxone, syringes, and other materials as I could fit. Came back to St. Louis, where all of this was not legal. Went to the, I may be crazy, but that's stupid. I went to the mayor and the city prosecutor, told them my intentions of handing out these things, and asked them if they were going to arrest me now or after. And they gave me the proverbial nod of approval. So I launched underground naloxone distribution, syringe programming, and everything in the state of Missouri, which was cool. Then worked on all the legislation, then hooked up with a buddy down in South Florida because it was a mess down there. And then I started the same kind of program down there, where I was flying down there, handing out naloxone, doing trainings, and I met up with a guy named Justin Kunzelman. So he and I started Rebel Recovery in Florida. Pass it over to him. Some stuff is going on down there, but that's like a brief little entrance to all of this. I mean, it gets much deeper. It took 5 years to pass a lot of these laws. I try to be humble, but I do boast about one thing, is that after 4 years of not being able to pass the overdose immunity law, I was able to get with the mayor of St. Louis at the time, Mayor Slay, and the alderperson who was in the district where my office was, and we passed a city ordinance that was a Good Samaritan law. And the thing about like the statutes and the law is one word can change everything. So all we had to do was, write policy that says an officer may not arrest, which is a much different law than an officer shall not arrest. So we were able to overtly circumvent state policy simply by changing the word to may not arrest. And we were able to pass the only time there's been an overdose immunity law passed in a city. So that was cool. And then the work just kept going and going. I was getting recognized. I was on the news a lot, won an Emmy, some TV show followed me around for a minute. But I don't really care about that stuff. I'm not here for popularity. I'm not very well liked by most of the community. So I'm just here to do the work.
No, thanks for expanding on that. And look, before we move forward, I want to ask you this question. All right. So a lot of people, they have misconceptions about harm reduction. I think a lot of people, they just associate risk reduction tools with harm reduction. And so I want to hear kind of your definition.
There has been a substantial lack of education around this topic. And, there's some factors that played into that. People didn't become interested in this topic until there was a fiscal note attached. So you had organizations and entities that have been in this field for 30 years who would shun harm reduction because there was no funding. Now, I can't completely fault them because we have a for-profit healthcare system and this capitalist structure that even if somebody was passionate that was in one of these systems, one of these bigger orgs, they were not allowed the space in order to work on those things. So there's culpability, but there's also an understanding of how the system is set up. So for many years, we were just an underground group of misfits. We had an underground buyers club where we would purchase naloxone, distribute it amongst each other. We had a dude flying to India to buy Harvani because it's dirt cheap in India. He was in Australia, probably maybe leave that talking about some illegal stuff, but whatever. So it was our version of, the buyers club. If you watch the movie with Matthew McConaughey, we were getting Harvani from India, brought back to Australia, shipped to the US. We were ordering naloxone. We had a syringe wholesaler. We did all this stuff underground, from bake sales and fundraisers and trivia nights, self-sustaining. And, thankfully with the help of Gary and Francis Comer, who started Comer Family Foundation and AIDS United. So, this really small core group, we didn't really play well with others just because, they looked at us like enablers, or they really didn't understand. And again, once again, not entirely their fault, because they were indoctrinated into this system, that we have here, which, I was too, in a way. So there's a gap there, because typically, mentors teach, and then the people they teach, they taught, you had all these people rushing into harm reduction that were never given the opportunity to learn, that were never given the opportunity to meet some of, the individuals that came before me that are no longer here. Combine that with, an air of arrogance where people are know-it-alls, or Google's at their fingertips, and they'll go to, Harm Reduction Coalition and read the definition and think, okay, that's harm reduction. But, the application and the understanding is still very misunderstood. And, because we're running into the wall of one of the walls in America, which is, harm reduction is rooted in social justice at the end of the day. Because if you look at pillar one of harm reduction, we accepting, drug use exists and doing what we can to remove negative consequences. 90% of the negative consequences we're trying to remove are put there by our policies. And our policies are put in there to disenfranchise BIPOC communities, rural communities, tribal communities, and LGBTQI plus communities. So in order to rectify that, we have to create equity. So when that topic comes up, you lose people that are still harm reductionists. So that's a huge misunderstanding, is how does this paradigm work? What does the structure look like? And people believe that the act of handing out naloxone or syringes equates to being a harm reductionist, and it doesn't. You are who you are, regardless of any independent actions you do. It's at your core being of how do you see the world? How do you view equity? How do you view reforming, the current system? That's going to help you understand what harm reduction is, and whether you are a harm reductionist, or you're just a person who works as a recovery support specialist, a person in recovery who also does this. Because the amount of email signatures I see that's a harm reduction specialist, and then the content of their email is just horrifically against harm reduction. There's a massive disconnect, but it's difficult to grab that pool and educate. I'll tell you a story of peer support specialists. 10 years ago, when that whole idea was brought up, there was a divide from powers that be. Half of the room wanted to certify organizations, which is the way to go, because organizations will be able to control. They have accountability, continuing education, lots of checks and balances in place when you do it that way. The other half of the room wanted to certify people. We know who won, because we certify individuals now. Very similar with harm reduction. We have to pull away from this free-for-all. You come to this training that's never been vetted, that only got passed because somebody knows somebody, and now you carry this credential, but your actual knowledge is worthless. So we need to reel back a lot of things and create a system where we're certifying and educating entities that can act with accountability and check people who are out running around claiming to be something.
That speaks exactly to what you were saying about risk reduction tools versus a framework of harm reduction, of a social justice policy framework. And I think that's critically important for people to understand.
Well, I mean, when I was doing an interview earlier this month or last month, I don't know, whenever I look at a resume and we ask people the definition of harm reduction, if they give me, HRC's definition, it's you get a negative score. I want to hear something from the heart, and you can put the same type of, because I mean, their definition is perfect. A lot of things, it's over 20 years old. So a lot of things have changed as far as application of the principles. but its core definition, unfortunately, one of the characteristics of human beings is we cause harm, whether we intend to or not. So harm reduction is a greater concept than drugs. So we have to recognize, and this requires humility and empathy, which are two characteristics that I think a lot of people lack, and also the willingness to learn. So you have to have those three things, because you have to accept that as this being, as a human, no matter what or how pure or how great or how noble my actions are, somebody will be harmed because of them, no matter what I do. So, our job working in harm reduction is to understand the nature of man or nature of humans, recognize that, accept it as an absolute truth because it is, and see where that unintended harm is befalling and do what we can to alleviate it, correct it, prevent it, reduce the damages caused. So harm reduction is a much bigger philosophical concept than what people think. You could almost create, a school of philosophy that would be harm reduction. It would be a combination of, I guess, like Locke, existentialism, and a few others, and throw them all together because the rule can be short, brutish, and cruel. And sometimes things are meaningless. So you can combine all of those things together to understand this philosophical system in which people that are actually harm reductionists exist, because there's not that many of us that really do live in that bubble of thought. But that's where you need to get to if you want to be a purist in this work and actually create positive change.
It's really, I think, something that I've been just seeing a lot is that autonomy is not really valued and respected in a lot of these spaces if we're talking about in the field of recovery or in the treatment industry. And so it's just my view of harm reduction philosophy is often in direct combatance with things that have been established for some time, that have been very, very solidified and that come from an authoritarian place. And so when I look at this, it's a lot of times I have to kind of check myself and go okay, we're dealing with years and years of indoctrination. We're dealing with people who have, the intention to save lives. But what I found is that, and I'm talking about in the recovery space, is that it seems to be conflicting. It seems to be actually going against. I'm not trying to go into this, bringing up something in regards to fighting, the recovery space, but I do want to hear your perspective on just that as a whole. What are some things that you've had to deal with when it comes to established norms and just anything within that realm? There's no wrong answers.
That's a whole nother animal to deal with,
Yeah.
And then we're going to bring in topics that are difficult to discuss in this type of space because political affiliations come into play, people's attitudes towards disenfranchised communities.
Yeah.
There's a bigger divide picture that exists that happens to be placed inside this small room that makes divide greater. So it's a much bigger conversation than what's happening there. It's are the influences and environmental factors happening all around them that is causing this pressure and this conflict, because it's greater than drugs and it's greater than recovery and it's greater than recovery pathways. It's a pressure cooker. And then you put them all inside, I don't want to say a church basement, but you do. What do you think is going to happen? You see the arguments and fighting when it comes to political belief systems, when it comes to reproductive. I mean, it all gets jammed into this viewpoint. And that's another system that has to be broken. I mean, we have so much kind of repairing work to do that I know where you're at. I know your passion, but if we look at a war plan, that's way down the road, just because of all the other things that have to happen first in order to like release the valve and start removing some of that pressure that's causing, those behaviors, those interactions, those conflicts. We right now, if it's like, before you check your coolant, you got your car cooled down, or you're gonna blow your hand off. If we open that now, that's exactly what is going to happen. And it's a conversation that needs to happen, but in order to be successful, it needs to happen at the right time. And now is not the right time. We have all these other issues to deal with beforehand. So we can get to there and the engine's cool and we can release that steam.
I say, just to sort of summarize where you're coming from on that, is that your perspective, and something that I believe deeply, is that harm reduction is a movement for social justice. That the core principle of harm reduction is leading with social justice and equity. And until we can work on that factor alone in a broader context and get people to simply understand that, then we won't be able to push for respecting autonomy, including within recovery spaces. We won't be able to have those discussions appropriately because of the context that we haven't even agreed on the basic set of facts that we need to value autonomy in social justice movements. Yep. And so it is difficult because it, like Macaulay, like what you're talking about respecting autonomy in recovery, it's a hard enough place to come to when the broader context of social justice at large isn't something that we can even agree to discuss in general in society.
You're chiseling down like respecting autonomy in recovery when some of the nation doesn't respect the autonomy of life and thinks George Floyd deserves to die.
Yeah.
So like we can't even fix that. And that's so broad. That's such an easy like answer. And we can't get people to respect the autonomy of life. So if you want to dial it all the way down to respecting the autonomy of personal decisions and recovery and the use of medication, whoa, slow down. Cops murder people. And half of the world and a lot of the country is okay with that. So let's work on that part first. I tell people that come to the space is like prepare for disappointment. Prepare for not achieving your goals, but you're crucial because, with where we're at right now, let me reel it back a little bit. So one of the, first wave individuals of harm reduction was Mark Kinsley, who passed away a few years ago. He was part of the original group, and he and I were working on a toolkit for the CDC together for best practices for the employment of people who use drugs within recovery community spaces. And I remember this still strikes me, and because he was one of the originals and a dear friend. Miss him very much. And he apologized, and he was the sweetest man. And he apologized, like, Chad, I'm sorry that like we didn't do this sooner. And I'm like, hold up, like you have nothing to apologize for. Like we have been given like in this multiverse timeline that we exist on right now. This is the only time where we've had an opening to do things like this. So this is the first chance we've gotten to edge our way. And you all spent 30 years of work to make this moment happen where we have a doorway. So like all this doorway is giving us an opportunity and we can't fuck it up. And it's a lot of people are going to because they're too, I'm not going to say too progressive. They're too quick to like finality, because our role here is to simply lay the blueprint. In this window, like we get in, we ferment a blueprint that our great grandkids can finish. If you come into this space expecting that this door that just got opened, which first off, respect the people that open the door for you, and a lot don't, know who they are, know their names, learn the history of this movement, and understand that like out of respect for them, out of love for them, and out of like the love you should have for the future generations to come, like, don't screw this up. We have one task: build the blueprint. lay the foundation. Then we die, and other people will finish the work. But if you come in there thinking like it's all going to get fixed, you're going to fuck it up.
Very
For a
normal
second,
for people to become aware of something and then to get excited about it. I mean, I've seen that in myself, definitely, and it's something that I kind of had to look at. All right, well, where can I actually impart change? You know what I mean? Like realistically, in my lifetime, and that's been a lot of my own personal journey. Is like, okay, well, I'm personally focused on like the treatment industry alone, and how kind of getting my foot in that door and being able to even just advocate for different AMA practices, and things like that.
I used to own a treatment center.
Yeah.
I know the problems there. I know like negotiating an in-network contract with United Health. I mean, I know what that looks like, and it's terrible. And then you have to keep the doors open.
Yeah.
And you have billable rates, and you have like horrible reimbursements, and so that project alone like is a generational fix, because I'll tell you right now, 70% of people in treatment right now are in the wrong modality because they should be in a primary mental health facility. But with the way the IMD exclusionary rule is set up and lots of other things that are in place, is like, okay, so we can have more than 16 beds, has to be attached to a hospital, has to kind of look like Cuckoo's Nest. And who wants to go there? Or would you want to go to like Passions Malibu, like on the beach? Yeah, I want to go there. Yeah, but you're not going to get like TMI and DBT and the type of therapy you need. So, like what you want to do is just as important, if not more, than what I'm trying to do. But that's also a generational fix, because, okay, we have to work on like our basic system of care and our treatment modalities, which have no regulation. I have gone through JACO and CARF accreditations. They don't give a shit about treatment. Like clinically, they don't care what you're doing. Does everyone have name tags? Are you HIPAA compliant? It's like, where's your modalities? Are you offering this? Are you offering that? Because that's a battle. Because you got to fight the DEA to loosen out the dome restrictions, to do inductions within a treatment center. There's so much that you have to do in order to actually fix treatment, that like your overhaul is massive. And then you also have to fight, universal healthcare.
Chad, that speaks a little bit to what you're talking about in terms of on the broader scale. To fix these issues, you have to have that social justice focus. And part of that is, and long has been my belief, that finding a way to universal healthcare is a social justice and equity movement. To be able to do that would allow us to open the door to numerous other things, and it would create so many other unseen opportunities. I mean, it would reduce job lock. Your job wouldn't be tied to your insurance status. You wouldn't have to rely on being employed to have insurance, for example. So that in and of itself is exactly what you're talking about these structural factors that are necessary for true implementation of harm reduction. You have to apply that same social justice and equity framework across the board. And part of that is to healthcare. And what you're talking about.
If you look at, step one, we haven't even done step one yet. Like, we've done all this change. We haven't even done step one yet, at least in my game plan. Step one is we have to ensure that every person in the United States meets the basic threshold of the social determinants of health.
Yeah.
Housing, healthcare, food stability, employment, all those things. That's step one. Mm-hmm. So talk about like, how long is it? And that's step one for the treatment industry. So Step one is ensure that every citizen receives the bare minimum threshold of the social determinants of health. It'll be 50 years before we get step one done.
And I think, having done advocacy work for a while now, on health policy, I know exactly what you're talking about wanting to jump in and try and like boil the ocean, and recognizing that not only are you not going to be able to do that immediately, and that the process is long, daunting, complex, and that you also cannot be a purist and say, this is the only thing that we need to focus on, and this is what we need to get done. Because in order to get things accomplished in policy spaces, you have to be able to narrow your scope, narrow your focus, and make the compromises you need to accomplish those goals. And so I understand how when somebody comes to this space or newly recognizes sort of the importance of recognizing these things, the importance of harm reduction, the importance of doing these things to save lives, and then says, why haven't we done this already? Why can't we do this right now? It's like, come join me. Come walk the halls of the state legislature and see how we actually get things done, and see why you cannot do these massive structural changes overnight. It's just not possible. And so you do have to dial back your expectations and come to grips with what you are able to accept if you want to stay in those spaces, or recognize that you can't stay in those spaces because you do have to compromise some of what you want, what are your goals are, and what you believe, in order to make the smaller wins to end up accomplishing those goals.
Yeah, a
And
lot
if
of
you
people
can't,
can't.
yeah,
Unfortunately, that takes a lot of critical thinking and like self-reflection. And you know, we don't have a group of like people rearing up to work in this work at all. That like it's a sad like dynamic we have when we're so much better than like we are. I know that the characteristics of people are so much more profound and noble than what is displayed currently. Um, and we need people to deep down to have courage, to try to make a difference and let go of shame, let go of like what other people think about you, and also be grounded and realize that if you don't get yourself grounded and realize the extensive like longevity and intricacies of this work, you're going to burn yourself out in 2 years. And really understand, like, do you want to do this? Because we need people. But we need people that are going to stick and stay. To this day, I check myself. I have people I call, I'm considered a friggin' expert. Now, I never gave myself that title. Other people did. And once they did, I took it. But, never declare yourself anything until somebody else that is above you has established that for you. So until somebody tells you you're an expert or a subject matter expert or this or that actually is in that space, you're not that yet. So humble yourself to and work for what you want, and realize the importance of this work, and also the importance of like staying teachable. Just finishing like the Sistine Chapel at 87 years old. I'm still learning. Every day I'm learning, because you have to be intellectually, open to change. And nothing, as far as I'm concerned, literally everything is firmly etched in jello, because it's all subject to data change, to policy change. And if you have to be able to move with that, like Bruce Lee's whole water thing, like be water. If you can't do that, there's so many other spaces that need people. But for this space, you have to be fluid. You have to be able to shut down argument. I mean, there's so much that comes with this that, it's amazing work, but it's definitely draining. You ain't going to be rich. And like I said, like you're probably not going to accomplish what you want to, but you're going to make a difference.
Everything you've said is like a master class and kind of, what people can be exposed to if they're looking into this, if they're trying to get into this. I mean, obviously I've experienced many of the things that you've laid out. And I just think that it's really important to kind of look at what I've been really looking at a lot is, people who identify as being in recovery that are now looking into this stuff, and kind of some of the things you mentioned previously, Chad, about kind of like, these different certifications, and people are getting excited and maybe sometimes overzealous. And I think the spirit about this is, understanding that with autonomy, your own autonomy to engage in something like this comes like a huge responsibility, basically. And that it can be, it can be daunting when you're starting to look at this stuff and being exposed to things that are kind of foreign based on your established understanding of whether it be like recovery or just like these spaces as a whole. And so I think that you laid it all out in a really clear and concise way, and I genuinely appreciate that. I think it's really.
And I'll say this: at one point, I was a diehard, member of recovery support groups. I did not believe in medication. I thought that, like, behavioral, like breaking people down and turning them. I thought that was when I believed that.
Yeah.
I was taught that. I believed that. I learned that in treatment, and I'm stubborn, very stubborn, and I was able to change. There comes a point when you hit the point that the data so far outweighs your belief system that you're either going to be a moron or you're going to change, because it's there. You have to read it, and you can't run from it and mitigate it or try to explain it away with anecdotal evidence. So everybody will get to that point where, like, if they're in that space where they don't believe in human rights, they don't believe racism exists, they don't believe there's a xenophobic hidden agenda behind drug policy, when there is. So if they're truly faced with the facts, because there's a lot of them, and they still run and hide from them, those people are intellectual cowards, in my opinion, and you can't live like that. I used to be one. Luckily, I had great parents who gave me some, good DNA, and I was able to overcome my cowardness and succumb to what the reality of the data tells us. And I still conflicted with it to these days because, sometimes I do wonder. I go to jails and I do naloxone trainings, and, sometimes I wonder, like, man, this place did save some people. I've seen it, but it's killed more than it's saved. So I still hit conflicts when I see things that I know are harmful based on the data benefiting some people. And you have to understand that you have to, like, you're going to struggle with internal conflicts. There's no way you can just be like, oh, all data. No, you're going to see stuff that is harmful, but you're going to see it help people. And you just have to kind of accept it. And it's definitely, like, it gets to the point of an existential crisis at times, because, what you're seeing is in direct contradiction of what you're saying. But you have to have faith and courage in, the intellectual abilities and research and outcomes that others have shown and proven for the past 30 years.
By some things as well. And I mean, it's something that time and time again, like what you reference when it comes to, institutions like prison, you're going to meet tons of people who their own anecdotal experiences that is the thing that saved their life. You know what I mean? And I've
seen it.
I've heard it. I've seen it from people. And it's like, that's the thing, is like, we can validate that and then also go with things that are more evidence-based. But again, I mean, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's very conflicting. And that's why when I critique 12-step, I always say, like, hey, I support you. If this is working for you, I support you. I don't support your cause, but I support you individually. And I think you deserve the autonomy to engage in that thing. And that applies to so many different things. It's a bit different when we're talking about something being imposed on someone and then, like, in prison or, but there's people who are mandated to certain things, and they survive it. And what this is a whole other rant, but what I've found is that people survive in spite of many things, and it just shows their humanity is that they find things within these very flawed systems that they can then embody and use to their own benefit. And, that, to me, what that shows is human capability and just how awesome humans are. You know what I mean? And so I just attribute that, again, to humanity more so than maybe the institution.
12-step programs helped save my life after treatment,
Yeah.
without a doubt. Not like the program, but, people, genuine people that I met that loved me, because they gave me feelings of self-worth and respect and dignity. Now, I have outgrown the need for that validation from third parties, but for a long time, because I didn't have it internally. They supplied it to me. And you and I have had this conversation before, and we disagree because I look to Jungian CBT when I look at the steps, especially with the fact that one of the founders was in treatment by Carl Jung. And I see that inner CBT, like ingrained into recognizing like Buddhist principles of, accept suffering, powerlessness, and, self accountability, so I see things a little bit differently as far as that part. But the other part where I needed that validation of love and respect, and the only place I got that was in those rooms. So I definitely credit that experience to helping to save my life. But as I finally learned to accept and love myself, my true authentic self, and stop wearing masks because of my neurodivergence and all this other stuff, I would not have survived without that love, because I didn't know how to do it to myself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I that's my exact experience when it comes to just people who are amazing in those. That's the only reason why I survived. Like straight up, when I look at it, I'm like, that is why I survived in that space 100%. And yeah, in regards to like the Jungian stuff, I'm not gonna go into that because I know that's like a whole other can of worms. But
I know we disagree on that one, but it's okay.
yeah,
You can be wrong.
yes, 100%. I hold the same sentiment when it comes to, again, being validated for the first time by people who are not necessarily like family members or other things like that. And I mean, I remember specific events to where, like when I got my year chip and, it's just like actually being validated and seen and heard. And look, like, I can kind of caution people when it comes to putting so much emphasis on the concept of time and acquiring time, which for some people can kind of be counterproductive. But for me, it also was something that was bringing about some sort of, again, value, consistency, and all the things like that. I think, when we talk about like recovery as a whole, again, I think it's all about like autonomy and what someone wants to engage in, and then just going about that based on your individual personal needs. And that's something that I think I'm constantly kind of talking about, because I feel that we're not showing up for some people, and what they're exposed to often is not what they need.
I think we have a structure that's built that doesn't have, rigid accountability.
Yeah.
When it comes to monies. At the end of the day, like, you've got pass-throughs to SSAs, and there's nobody like looking over to checking for cultural competency, to having these discussions. So, I don't, we're set up to fail with the way things are right now. And it's fixable. But currently we do not offer basic equitable love. Everything's conditional, and healthcare and certain things, those are non-conditional services that people should receive. And we make things in the United States conditional. It's tit for tat, quid pro quo. And that's the kind of attitude that like we need to like erase. And again, that's before we get to step one, and we haven't even gotten there yet. So the longevity of this is very long. We lose people because they just don't comprehend how big this subject is, and they think it's isolated to drugs, and drugs are bad. Okay, so we just have a lot of work to do.
Chad, what do you see as somebody in this policy space, as somebody who's doing this, not just advocacy work, but the actual policy creation and implementation? What do you see as the next steps moving forward, and what do you think people can do to try to sort of push the needle forward in their area, in their region?
Oh God, I have no idea. Well, because I can't give a general answer, because like it's not applicable. What you do in North Dakota is not what you do in Maine.
Sure.
So I would have to do an environmental scan, study, look at the demographics. I say that's what people have to do, is understand that there's no answer. There's no spoon. That's the answer is there is no answer.
There, I think one, I appreciate the Matrix reference there, um, and two, I think that's an interesting perspective to talk about. So, in your example, you looked at local laws, and as a lawyer, were able to find the needle in that haystack of let's just change this wording. And that is in and of itself going to change the way we approach harm reduction. So I wonder if there's, I mean, it may not be one thing that people can do, but is there something that you felt was a useful tool for you in your journey that people can sort of look to or think about?
It's like such a smart answer, but learn how to write cursive. Understand that when you're doing research on the internet, the treatment center articles are not validated, peer-reviewed research articles. I mean, it's just some really basic things. Read the conflicts of interest statements at the bottom of studies. Strictly stick to ResearchGate and National Library of Sciences. Just basic to dive down to the basics. Like, how do you educate yourself on a topic as unbiased as possible? That's what I would want people to do, is to become educated and not, like just follow, Big Pharma pays for studies. When I'm published, Big Pharma was in the room. You can look and see it's there. Like that study that just came out last week about, what was it, Now For Me? That was like paid for by advisor. It's like, it says it right there. Like, throw it in the garbage. Like, so understanding like what research is, but then you have like so many people that like don't believe in science. Like, the flat earthers, they're global, which is funny because it's a globe. It's like, how do we do that? How do we like rear back to like basic, the most basics of intelligence? Start there, because that's more important than that will prepare you for the rest, is just learning how to learn and reading.
What do you see for you as your next steps? Or what do you see as like what in your capacity, like what do you see coming down the line that will be able to be?
I want to become a little overweight and eccentric like Marlon Brando or Howard Hughes and disappear. Those are my dreams. Just ghost on the world. I don't know. I want to raise two good humans, and show them that like they don't have to live in this world that their friends live in. There's another plane of existence in our reality that you can step onto and you can live there, and it's more beautiful there because people love each other and care about each other there. So that's my goal, is to stay on that path. As long as I stay on that path, like, good things will happen. There's so many things that I want to accomplish, but there's so many intervening factors that I have no control over that will determine whether or not I accomplish those things. So, I want to stay like peaceful and on the correct path, because, the obstacle is the path. We can show the rest of the world what it could be like, when they're ready. And a lot of people aren't ready. But, I care about at the end of the day, I got two kids that are my whole world. And I want them to, after I'm gone, I want to ensure that I give them the best opportunities possible to live above and be at peace and work towards a world that loves each other and builds bridges and not silos. The work I do is, an extension of me being a dad, because I want them to live in a world where their chances of survival, from whatever, my daughter's abilities to access healthcare, my grandchildren's ability to do the same. I want to raise children that are going to like continue that progressive work, So that involved lots of things. At the end of the day, it just comes down to I'm a dad and I love my kids, and this work is what is best for their future as a whole. I'm selfish.
Chad, when people are ready, where can they find you? Where are all your things? Plug your.
If they want technical assistance support on a variety of issues, I can submit a request to the Opioid Response Network, requested me as their consultant. And my name is my handle on every social media account. Very easy to find, very difficult to get in touch with, though. So just keep trying.
Sounds good. Chad, I appreciate you. I would love to have you back on and talk more about all of this and, about harm reduction and what that means to you. I appreciate you so much,
All right.
Macaulay. Thank you as always.
The views and opinions discussed on this podcast are personal and do not reflect the views or opinions of our employers. Although medical and clinical topics may be discussed in this podcast, the information provided is not medical nor clinical advice. Thank you for watching and or listening.